Hello, everybody. It's Peter McLaughlin. This is BlueSky Hypnosis, Friday Live at 5. Welcome. I hope you guys have had a great week, and I'm looking forward to today's episode. We're going to be talking about spiritual attachments. We're going to be defining what spiritual attachments are, and most important, how to resolve this situation if you have it, how to resolve and remove it. My standard disclaimer, which I feel the need to say every week, is I am not a psychologist. I am not an MD. So if you have any serious physical or psychological issues, please contact your local licensed psychologist or medical doctor. If you have questions today, please feel free to ask those questions. It's what makes this alive. It's what makes it interesting. It's what brings me back here week after week, that's for sure. And if you have suggestions for future lives or content that you would like to see on the channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, please feel free to make those comments and suggestions as well. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to just start talking about what is a spiritual attachment. When I say that phrase, what does that mean? And let me preface all of this by saying that I'm really coming from the perspective of my experience working with clients in my hypnosis practice, which is, it started off just all physical, people coming into my office, and then it moved into doing telephone sessions, and it moved into doing Zoom sessions. Now, in the last year, it's been pretty much 100% Zoom sessions. So it's really drawing on that body of experience, and what it means to me is, or what I wanted to say is that I don't have all the answers on this. People will write to me sometimes and they'll talk about how their house is essentially haunted. It's got some kind of entities in that house. I've come across that a few times with clients, but for the most part, what I'm talking about with spiritual attachments, with spiritual entities, is this notion that a person, in my words, in my view, essentially has a parasite. So we talk about a physical parasite, like if you eat food that hasn't been cooked properly or hasn't been washed properly, you can get these organisms, these parasites that attach to you, usually in your gastrointestinal tract, and they can affect your health. They can affect your levels of energy. They could cause you to have certain kinds of craving. Well, in my view, a spiritual attachment is an energetic being, an energetic entity that attaches to your energy system in the same parasitic way that a physical organism attaches to your gastrointestinal tract. So what exactly is a spiritual attachment? Well, I would say it's a human being whose physical body has died, and their energetic spirit, whether you want to call that their spirit or their soul or their etheric body, has not left this plane. It's stayed here. And this plane, I think, is designed for us to have a physical body to operate. It would be like us trying to operate in the ocean without a boat. Yeah, you can swim, but how long can you tread water? How efficiently can you swim if you're in the middle of the ocean? You really kind of need that vehicle of a boat. And on this plane, I think, this is my opinion, we need a physical body to really experience what it is, what it means to be on the earth. And because free will is always in effect, these entities, some of them, well, some people who die, they don't go to the next place. And you may call the next place heaven or Valhalla or Eden or the afterlife or the life between lives. They don't go there. They stay on this plane. And in order to feel like they sort of have a body, it doesn't really having a body, it's sort of like having one, they can attach to a living person's energetic field. Now, when this happens, the person who's received the attachment can have their thoughts corrupted. In other words, their thoughts aren't entirely their own. And because emotions can flow from thoughts, it would mean that their emotions aren't really their own. And because we make decisions based upon emotions, it could mean that it's starting to corrupt your decision-making ability, your emotions, and your actions. Well, that would also corrupt the outcome. What kind of life that you're living. And it has when I first discovered this sort of thing, it really kind of blew me away. Like, oh my God, what's going on? And the longer I've been doing this work, and I don't know if it's a function of what's going on in the world right now, or if it's just I'm more sensitive and I kind of routinely check this with clients, and certainly not everybody has them at all, but kind of a shockingly large number of people have these energetic beings attached to them. And what's really remarkable is that when we're able to successfully move out any attachments a person has, they often report feeling this almost immediate feeling of lightness. It's almost like, they've been carrying around this 10-pound bag of sand, and they've been carrying it so long they didn't even realize they were carrying it. And the contrast of, in one moment, I say one moment, but it can take a while, of having that 10-pound bag of sand, put down on the ground, they feel this concomitant lightness that sort of washes over them. And it can even go beyond that too. So I have a number of clients, even recently, who have described to me, when we meet for our second session, and that could be a week later, it could be 2 weeks later, they'll talk about how they felt almost giddy, like this bubbling enthusiasm, this bubbling joy and happiness flowing up from inside of them. Well, if you really were able to offload 10 pounds of sand in a very short period of time, and you'd been carrying it for a long time, I mean years, then you could imagine that sense of possibility and freedom and the kind of joy that could come along with that, which is really kind of cool. I'm just going to see who's tuned in so far. I don't think we have any questions yet. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them, because otherwise I'm just going to have to keep going along my list here. But let's see who's tuned in. So it looks like Nicole P is here. Hello, Nicole. Shout out to Marie Hogan and Estelle. Glad to have you guys here. Chalice Robinson. Melissa Minix. Looks like you might be new here, Melissa. So glad to have you here. Beth Reinstein and Rosa Morales Sanchez. Good evening, everyone from England, she says. And Beth is saying, hi, Peter. And Karma Gold. Okay, so Karma has a question. And Karma is from Zurich, Switzerland. JW Fat, good to see you here. Karma's question is, boom. How do they get attached in the first place? Awesome question. So on my little promo, on one of the bullet points, I wrote down something, what creates vulnerability? What creates the opening that they can get attached in the first place, which is the question that you're asking. And there are three things, let's call it 3 things plus 1, that in my understanding of this, and again, I'm not saying that I have a perfect understanding of this. I've just been doing it for a long time, and I feel like I've gotten more and more successful over the years. So number 1 is an emotional extreme that's held for a period of time. So if a person is depressed for a long period of time, it creates a vulnerability, an opening. It's like the door to your front house is wide open, and you leave to go shopping, and you go to bed at night, and the door is still standing wide open. You go off on vacation, door is still standing wide open. It doesn't mean somebody's going to walk through that door, but it creates the vulnerability that could happen. Number 2 reason is having intimate relations with a person who themselves has these attachments. So in that time of intimacy, and it's part of the beauty of it, there's this wide opening. And so in that sense, it creates the possibility of almost like a spiritual STD. The third one, I think, is the most common reason why somebody would have a spiritual entity attached to them, and that is drugs and alcohol. And it's not like if you smoke pot a couple of times, or if you have a couple of drinks here and there. It's more, in my experience, more of a period of heavy usage. So the thing about the alcohol part that I find so fascinating is that we have several words for alcohol in the English language. So alcohol Sometimes in a colloquial sense, we call it booze. We call it liquor. And we also call it spirits. That's kind of interesting, right? We also have this phrase called under the influence of alcohol. So if all of those words that define alcohol, liquor, spirits, and booze, if they all mean the same thing, and you can be under the influence of alcohol, then you can be under the influence of spirits. And when I first learned about this, it still does. It kind of gives me goosebumps, because I really don't think that we call it spirits for no reason whatsoever. You know, I mean, when I first heard these words, it's like, oh, it's just, you know, booze, alcohol, liquor, spirits. It's all the same thing. But I think there's a reason we call it spirits. And the word alcohol supposedly comes from Arabic, al-kul, which means body-sucking entity. So I think what happens is that when we pollute our body with alcohol, it gets so toxic that our own spirit kind of flies the coop and says, I'm out of here, and it leaves. And maybe that's what happens when people drink so much that they pass out. You know, and I would say in that time, the door to your house is wide open and unlocked. And that is one of those three areas that I mentioned when you can be vulnerable to spirits, spiritual entities. The fourth one, I said 3 plus 1. And the reason I put the 1 kind of off by itself as another reason is because I don't run into this very often. But there are people that do that. And it would be if they were purposely calling in kind of dark spirits, right? They were, you know, engaging in some kind of ritual, whether they thought that they were doing it, you know, on purpose, seriously, they really wanted to do that, or they were doing it for fun, that could also create this spiritual attachment. And I suppose now that I'm saying this, that another one would be, you know, kind of spending a lot of time in a graveyard, playing around in graveyards, maybe even ghost hunting. You know, this is something I've run into a couple of times, but most people that I've worked with haven't been, you know, professional or amateur ghost hunters, or they haven't said to me, you know, I like to just spend time in a graveyard. But those places, I think, probably coupled with maybe being really angry or really depressed, or experiencing extreme anxiety, those states coupled with being in those places could probably create the opportunity for an attachment as well. So thank you so much for that question, because it really, it was a nice segue into that point that you know, one of the things that I wanted to cover. All right, let's see what else we have here. It looks like more people have tuned in, which is awesome. And that last one was Karma Gold. So thank you, Karma. And JW Fat, hello to you. And here's Laura Gardner. Laura says, how do you know if you have that unwanted attachment? Great question. So I mentioned before that in my practice, and I'm going to get to your question, but I want to hit it from like 3 different angles. In my practice, it's now something I almost, if you want to call it, screening for it, because it's so common. And I know that people who come to me are self-selected. They're people that are open to this kind of work. They tend to be people who've tried everything else to resolve whatever issues they've been dealing with, and nothing else has worked. And so I'm kind of like, you know, the last stop, if you will, or somewhere near the last stop. So it's a self-selected group, and I kind of screen for that. The other thing would be, well, one of the answers to your questions would be something just doesn't feel right. You know, you have an intuitive sense that something isn't quite right. Sometimes people can see something kind of with their peripheral vision, or maybe they have like nightmares every single night of the week, or they have a couple nightmares routinely every week that are recurring. That could be a sign. And then the other way is kind of coming back to this tool that I reference often. You guys who've tuned in before will have heard me say this a million times, that I like to use a pendulum. Other people might like to use kinesiology or muscle testing, but I like to use a pendulum because it's a pretty reliable tool when you learn how to use it to understand what's going on in the deeper part of your mind. And so I will have client holding the pendulum, going through the process of clearing the pendulum, calibrating the pendulum, make sure they're getting accurate answers with it, and then simply asking the question. And the question, as I would phrase it, would be, once you've calibrated your pendulum, do I have any spiritual entities that are attached to me and or my being? And the reason that I phrase it that way, attached to me and or my being, is I want to imply not just my physical body, but also my energetic or etheric body. Because again, kind of through trial and error early on, I might have gone through this pendulum thing with a person saying, is it attached to me? And gotten a no. And the pendulum happens to be super, super, super specific. And later, a couple sessions later, it's like something's still going on with this person. Something is not quite right. Here's another way you can figure this out. If you're getting really weird answers with your pendulum, sometimes that can indicate that a person has an entity attached to them. And so we would go back and ask more specific questions. And once we asked about attachment to the person's energetic body, bing, we got a hit. So the long answer to your question would be, I would use a pendulum to determine if I had a spiritual entity attached to me. And then if I got a yes to that, then we start asking, okay, I would just leap to, do you have more than 3 entities attached to you? If you get a no, you know you're dealing with 1, 2, or 3. If you get a yes, now you might want to go, okay, well, do I have more than 10 attached to me? And if you get a no to that, you know you're somewhere between 3 and 10, and you get the idea, right? You can sort of narrow down how many you have. Now, there are times when I will work with somebody who has more than 20. Once they have more than 20, we don't need to know exactly how many they have. We just know they have a ton of these unwanted tenants in their energetic field, and we need to move them out. If we know that there's, say, 4, then it helps in that process of moving them out, because sometimes you can move them out all at once. Sometimes you might be able to move out 2 of them, and 2 of them stay, and 2 of them are more stubborn. But it helps us to understand, when you've got a workable number, this process of moving them out. If a person's got more than 20, what usually happens is that the first wave, they're able to get out a large number of them. It could be 10, it could be 15, for example. And then the remainders are a little bit more stubborn. But again, to answer your question, I would use a pendulum in order to ascertain whether I had any of these entities attached to me or not. And then the next question, if it was a yes, is how many. I'd kind of want to know how many I had attached to me. Another tool that a person could use if they wanted to would be, as I mentioned before, kinesiology or muscle testing. For those of you that don't know how to use a pendulum, that's not a 2-part video series, it's a 1-part. It's a 1 video on my YouTube channel, which is BlueSky Hypnosis on YouTube. Just type in the word pendulum under my channel, and it will teach you how to use the pendulum, how to calibrate it, how to get it to the point where you're asking questions and getting accurate answers. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm just trying to pop up that little reminder there. BlueSky Hypnosis. Okay, cool. Let's see what else we have here. Thanks, Laura. Appreciate that. Joyce Shaw is here. Shout out to Joyce. And here's Anamete Hein. Oh, here's a question Shannon is asking. Are you talking about pain bodies? The reason I hesitate on that question, is we could be. And what I mean by that is that an attachment or an entity can cause different kinds of thoughts in your mind. And your whole life is run by the thoughts that are in your mind. That influences your emotions. Your emotions influence your physical body, right? If you're carrying constant tension, for example, if you're really angry, if you're in a state of joy, all of these things affect your physical body. And your emotional state and the thoughts you have affect the actions you take and the actions you don't take, and that affects the outcome. So an angry being that's attached to you, a frightened being that's attached to you, could be considered, in the way of my thinking, to be a pain body, right? To be that part of you. If you think of yourself as made up of many parts, the entity actually, one of these entities actually becomes a kind of part of you. And over and over again, when we've moved out one of these entities, person suddenly is like, no more nightmares, for example. Or they're not afraid of driving over a bridge that goes over the water. Maybe that entity, ran their car, committed suicide or ran their car off a bridge and into the water. And now client is feeling this like inexplicable fear every time they go up and over a bridge that goes over the water. That could be their own experience from a past life or from their present life. It could be something that they took on from somebody else in this life, or it could be an entity that's attached to them. And what we want to be certain of is when there is an entity attached, that, in my way of thinking, it's the first thing that we move out, because it's such a corrupting influence. And once all the entities have been moved out, now we kind of reassess where that person is. And what we may find is that some of the reasons they came to see me in the first place are either significantly better or totally improved. We don't really know, but we've got to get those entities out before we can begin really working on the problem. At least that's how I look at it. All right. So here's a question by Smitheron704. And Smitheron is saying, are subliminal channels that use programmed energy, such as quotable integrity, safe to use? I've had ongoing nightmares since using these channels. Ow, okay. So there's no way that I can sort of vouch for or criticize channels that I don't even know. I have no experience with them whatsoever. What I can tell you is that on my own channel, with them, because I have a lot of subliminal tracks, I find them to be extremely effective for a lot of people. So I have plenty of subliminal tracks, for example, on weight loss. And some people that use those tracks will have nightmares. And what I believe is happening in those cases, and again, I can only speak about my own cases because I know exactly what's on those tracks. I know that everything on those tracks is positive, life-affirming, loving, and aimed toward their goal, which is to lose weight in a really healthy way, which is to eat healthier, which is to love themselves. All those tracks are built around ultimately loving oneself. And I believe that when this loving force comes in, say the light comes in, and what's already there is darkness, that there's a kind of clash that occurs. And I think in that clash, in that kind of collision of working on a resolution, the nightmare can come up. I think the nightmare, and I wouldn't say a consistent one that you have over a month, say, and I'm just speaking about mine now, is a way of the mind resolving this conflict between what's been living in the mind, say darkness and negativity, and what's coming into the mind in terms of subliminals while the person's sleeping, which is all of these positive affirmations, that they don't agree with each other. That it's kind of like two medieval armies meeting on a battlefield, and you just hear the clash of steel and wood and people shouting and all of this other stuff. And that, in my experience, with the people who continued to use these tracks, they overcome all of that. It goes away. And sometimes where one track might create that sense of unease and maybe even nightmares, maybe a different track on the same topic, for whatever reason, doesn't. But I think the bottom line is you have to develop a certain degree of confidence that what is being said on that track is something that you are comfortable with. One of the things that I attempt to do is when I create subliminals, at some point I create an audible version of the same track. So the person can start with the audible version where you can make out what's being said. I also put the excerpts in the track, in the video description of what's being said. So a person can read that too. You can also look at the other feedback that people are getting from that channel. See if other people have had nightmares. But I can say from my own perspective that some people that listen to my subliminals, and I know what's on there, have nightmares. And I know that the people that continue with that usually resolves. So hopefully that's helpful to you. So good question. So Beth Reinstein is saying, wow, I mean, it is pretty interesting information. And she's saying being in a vulnerable state emotionally and spiritually. Yeah, the way I like to think about this one is the vulnerability isn't the vulnerability of sort of, being open and being honest, being loving. It's not that kind of vulnerability, right? Where you take down your egoic armor and you're just like really honest and maybe you cry and you're talking to your partner and your kids or whatever it is. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying the vulnerability is created through like alcohol and drug addiction. I'm saying it's created through, having intimate relations with somebody who themselves has these spiritual entities attached to them. I'm saying it's created by emotional states that are low vibrational states. So depression that's held for a long period of time creates vulnerability. Being angry, like a really angry person, and holding that for a long period of time. Low self-esteem, low self-love. I guess suspicion of other people, avoiding human contact. And the way it makes sense to me is just vibrational. So the low states would be like a depression would be a very low vibrational state. A very high vibrational state would be joy, forgiveness, compassion, grace. All of those things would be a very high state. And the way I think about this is that the entities themselves are vibrating at a really, really, really low energetic frequency. The reason they're not going to the life between lives, to heaven, to the afterlife, is because they feel an intense sense of guilt and shame. They think they're going to be punished, for example. They feel an attachment to their physical possessions on this plane. I think that's why houses get haunted, one of the reasons. And so they're already vibrating at a low frequency. And what looks like and feels like home to them is a human being in a body who themselves is vibrating at a very, very low frequency. So by vibrating at that higher frequency of love, compassion, forgiveness, grace, you are in my way of thinking about this, kind of creating armor around yourself, spiritual armor. They're not interested in that. One of the things that I was saying to a client not long ago is that there's a business in a city nearby where I live, and it's got an awning out in front of it, and it's it's in a section of town where there are lots of homeless people. There are people that are dealing drugs. There's all kinds of stuff that's going on there, late into the night. And this business plays classical music. So all night long, it's just playing classical music. And it's not loud and it's not super quiet, but it's playing classical music kind of right under where that awning would be. And no one wants to deal drugs there. No one wants to hang out there. And I would say it's because the classical music itself is vibrating at a super high frequency. And the people that want to do the stuff that they want to do there are vibrating at a lower frequency. A lot of them are alcoholics or they're drug addicts or other things. And so it almost repels them because it doesn't intuitively or physically feel like home. And I say this with the utmost of compassion for people in that circumstance. I I don't like that they're in that circumstance. And I do think that part of the solution for all of us, whatever we're dealing with, and we all deal with different stuff, is to raise that vibration, because the body becomes healthier at that vibration. You know, you don't want to eat lots and lots and lots of heavy, dense food when you're vibrating at a high frequency. That's called comfort food. That's vibrating at a lower frequency. You know, you want to be out in the sun. You want to be, you know, with people that you love. You want to be laughing when you're vibrating at that higher frequency. So, you know, a long way, which I always do, of answering these questions is to think about frequency. What raises my frequency? What lowers it? How can I raise my frequency and keep it there? And I actually think that this is part of the reason why a lot of these sort of folk remedies for spiritual entities that are, you know, maybe in your house or around your person, most of them involve things like sage, burning sage. I think that raises the vibration. It raises the frequency. And I don't think that these entities are very interested in that. I think they're repelled by it. Essential oils, crystals, you know, all of these things, this is the way I interpret this, are raising the frequency. And just like playing classical music at this business, entities that are vibrating at low frequency don't want any part of that. So hopefully that makes sense. Just scrolling down here. So Melissa Minix is saying, I used to watch a lot of paranormal reality TV. Is that a way? I think if you go back to that, what I was just talking about in terms of your vibration, is it low? Is it high? I mean, certainly if you watched, for example, horror films and you just watched them you binged watched them nonstop for the whole weekend, I think you'd be in a really low frequency vibration by the end of doing that. If you watched a couple of paranormal, you know, like a ghost hunter show, and you watch something else about, I don't know, UFOs or whatever, I don't think that's going to do that any more than, you know, if you had a Krispy Kreme donut and otherwise you had a really healthy diet, that's going to make you sick. I mean, I think we can handle a certain amount of food and music and things that you watch, as long as it's balanced out with way more on the quote unquote higher vibration side. If you're already depressed, if you're already feeling really bad, and you're watching the, you know, horror films and stuff, that can't be very good. I mean, I can't even bring myself to watch a horror film. I can't do it. But anything with violence in it is going to affect you psychically, and it's probably going to pull down your vibrational frequency. And you know, maybe you're doing other things to offset that and you're okay, but I think it's all about balance, and it's all about keeping your vibration at a higher point. So it's a really good question. And again, I think it's kind of a nuanced answer. And I think if you put it in context of your diet, for example, you know that you can have a glass of wine here and there. You're probably going to be fine, no big deal. But if you're drinking 6 glasses of wine a day, that's not super healthy for you. And it would be the same with what you're taking in through your eyes and what you're taking in through your ears. So hopefully that makes sense. Thanks for asking the question. Oh, this is an interesting question. Shannon One Soul. Are dark energies attracted to light workers? That's a really, really good question. And I have an answer, but I'm not gonna try to pretend like I'm super confident about this one. What my anecdotal experience is that, and it's actually quite a few clients have had this, wherein they bring gifts into this lifetime. They bring spiritual gifts into this lifetime. And part of what they're struggling with right now is that they're not utilizing their spiritual gifts. And part of them knows this, like the higher part of them knows this. And it's like, what are you doing? We came here to use this gift that we've used in other lifetimes and that you purposely brought with you here for this time. You've got to get on your golden path. You've got to use this gift. And it's creating this kind of conflict inside of them. And there's another part of them that's like, we're not using that spiritual gift because the last time we were here, we got punished for doing that. Maybe they were burned to the stake, or maybe they were ostracized, or whatever it is. And so they're in this conflicted state. Now, a person like that could have negative entities attached to them. And the negative entities don't want that person to be using their gifts. And I think of a person using their gift as being a light worker. I happen to think that we all have gifts. That's my personal belief. Some people have them more developed than others. So could the entity be attracted to a light worker? They can certainly be involved in that light worker if the light worker is not really pursuing what they came here to pursue. Could the dark entities be wanting to suppress the light worker? Yeah, I think so. But that's where I go into, this is more of my hypothesis rather than, my personal experience that I've had on multiple occasions. I think it is possible that if you're this light force, that dark forces don't want you there. They want to push you down. However, I don't think that these entities that we're talking about are actually that powerful. Because I'm not talking about things like, what people might call demons and so forth. I'm talking about disincarnated human beings, right? And I don't think that they are that powerful in the face of your power. So hopefully that makes sense. And thanks for asking the question. Really wonderful question. Hello, Janice Winslow. Shout out to you. Just scrolling down here. Jennifer Young is asking if I've ever used dowsing rods. No, I have not used dowsing rods, like for searching for underground water or anything. I walked around with somebody once who was skilled at that. And my understanding is that all of these tools basically tap into the same part of you. So the pendulum, dowsing rods, kinesiology or muscle testing, I think they're all tools that you can see with one of your physical senses, or you can sense them with one of your 5 physical senses. But it's tapping into the same part of you that other people might describe as their intuition. This is just a more, in my experience, the pendulum for me is a more reliable way to get to the answer. And the way I came into contact with this whole concept in the first place was through a naturopath that I worked with that helped save me when I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and leukemia on the same day in 2003. And she used muscle testing to basically understand what was going on in my body, where the deficiencies were, where the toxic overload was, what I needed, when I needed it, how much I needed it, when to start, when to stop. It was amazing. And I felt like I learned so much from being on the other side of that coin. And she taught me how to use the kinesiology to a degree, but I never felt as comfortable with it as I do with the pendulum. And I don't think it really matters. Whatever tool works for someone. I have a client that I'm going to be meeting for the first time, and I think they were describing that they might not be able to use a pendulum because of tremors. And what I'm going to do, if that's the case, is we're just going to move into muscle testing and see if that works for this person. So anyway, good point. So Shannon One Soul is also saying, I only see good energy. I've had one attack me once. I stayed present and told it to go away. Yeah, I mean, if you're vibrating at a high frequency, you kind of understand what's going on and you tell it to go away. I think that's enormously powerful because, again, they're not going to be vibrating at your frequency. You're not going to feel like home to them. The best case for them is with this attack that they could bring you down, and then they would feel comfortable in that lower environment. I mean, it's said that like a rat is not happy when you turn on the lights. It's not happy when you clean everything up and there isn't old garbage and food lying around. When you clean an environment, you're kind of raising the frequency of it. So, yeah, I can see that would be powerful. Brittany Sturgill, hello, Brittany. She's saying, I was told 40 are with me. I mean, I've had that experience before. You know, I said that when we get over 10 or 20, I don't even count anymore. We just know you got a lot. You get like an infestation. You know, do you really have 40? Not sure. Not sure who told you that. May be true. What you can do is you can go, if you heard what I said before on my channel, the pendulum video teaches you how to use the pendulum, and then you can walk through the process of determining if you're getting accurate answers to your questions with the pendulum. And if you are, you ask, do I have any spiritual entities attached to me and or to my being? If you get a yes to that, you can say, do I have more than 3? If you get a yes to that, you can say, in your case, do I have more than 20? If you get a yes to that, we're pretty confident that the answer you got was right. So you could walk along that path. That might help. But if I were working with you, that's, again, the first thing that I would want to do is determine, A, do you have them? B, how many do you have? And then C, we move those out before we do anything else. Because if it is the case, it's probably corrupting your thoughts and your emotions and other aspects of your life. All right. Good luck to you. Okay, here's Rosa Morales Sanchez. How can we help the spirits attached to leave and go back to the light? Thank you. So I love the way, Rosa, you framed up this question, because I think you're way ahead of where I was when I first started this work, helping people remove these attachments, because I first saw them as bad. And now I see them with more compassion. And I think, the way you asked the question, it's an extremely compassionate way of viewing this. And in my experience, it's way more successful in moving them out. So it used to be that I thought, oh, we have to pull them out, we have to rip them out, we have to tear them out, we have to cut them out with a sword if they don't want to go. But if we understand that these entities are just like us in some ways, they just don't have a physical body anymore, but they had a physical body, and they had, they're human beings in that sense. And that the reason they didn't go to the light probably has way more to do with fear than anything else. And I'll move into how we move them out. So how do we do this with your question, Rosa? So I think the most powerful law in the universe is the law of free will. In other words, you cannot be forced to do anything. And if you are somehow forced to do something, then that person, that entity, that being has violated spiritual law, and they will pay a price for it under spiritual law, and they can't get away from that. So on some level, we have to agree to these attachments. Now, the agreement doesn't have to be a conscious, positive agreement. It can be a tacit agreement. I used that example before of leaving your door open and then going on vacation or going out to dinner or whatever you're doing. Well, if somebody walks in to your door, it's almost a tacit agreement. So what we want to do in the process of removing these entities is we want to rescind any kind of agreement that we had made. And when Shannon was talking about having an attack and feeling it and telling that entity to go away, it's like she was declaring in that moment her free will. I don't want you here. Get out. Go. And the entity left. And that's basically what we do in the process of moving these entities out, is that we rescind any agreement that we may have made in the past to allow these entities to be present, and we make it very clear that they have to leave now. We invoke the divine right to the sanctity of your body, to the sanctity of your being. We bring in support. So we bring in angels, we bring in ascended masters. We raise that person's vibration before they even try to do anything, to make it an inhospitable place for entities that are vibrating at a lower frequency. In addition to being straight up and very clear about the entities don't have your permission anymore to be present in your body or being, and that they have to leave, we also then move into the compassion part too, which is this isn't your home. We know you can't be very happy, and that if you go into the light, You will be greeted by people who loved you in your lifetime. You will feel like you're at home. And sometimes what we do is we'll have, under the auspices of a person's spirit guide or an ascended master or an angel, we'll ask if it's highest and best to bring someone who loved this entity in their lifetime into the picture that can then greet them and escort them back into the light. That is extremely powerful. And the most stubborn cases is when the client themselves has a subconscious need to be attached to the attachment. And when that's the case, we want to find out, who is this attachment? Is it somebody that the client knew in their present life? Is it someone they knew in a past life? One of the cases I had with a client who's an existing client right now is that when his daughter was born, an entity attached itself to him in the hospital when he was waiting for his daughter to be born. Who is the entity that attached to him? A 3-year-old girl who died in that hospital. Now, we wouldn't want to be tearing her out. We wouldn't want to be shouting at her and commanding her to leave or cutting the cords to get her out. My God, she's a 3-year-old girl who's confused, who died in this hospital and attached herself to a man who looked like a father. He is a father. And maybe he was scared about his daughter being born or whatever. I don't really know. But we wanted to use so much compassion. And we didn't want to just send her off. We wanted to bring in someone who loved her in her lifetime, that could take her in their arms and then safely bring her into the light so that she felt safe throughout the whole process. So in the stubborn cases, I said before that you might, let's say you have 4 entities attached to you, and 2 of them go instantly, but 2 of them are like a little bit harder. We'd want to know, who are those entities, ideally. Is it somebody you knew in your present life? Is it someone you knew in a past life? Do you have an attachment to the attachment? And sometimes the people can feel it. The client can feel it. They're like, look, I don't know why, but I feel deep sadness about letting this entity go. That's where the resistance comes in. And I didn't know that at first, but once you figure that out, and Rosa, you're exactly right. And you can combine this clear-eyed, clear directive, rescinding the permission, rescinding the approval, the agreement to have them attached to you, telling them they have to leave, with the compassionate part. Once I figured that out, it got so much easier. No more struggling. That there have been occasions even when we've had to make a deal with the entity, which is essentially, hey, entity, you're not supposed to be here. This isn't really your home. You're going to have to leave. How about this? How about you go into the light for 30 seconds with the agreement that after the 30 seconds, you can come right back. Tell us how it was. Every time we've done that, the entity realizes it has nothing to fear from the light, and it doesn't want to come back. It's ready to stay in the light. So there are these different strategies that are built around being clear, bold, powerful, and direct, kind of like Shannon was, and also being compassionate and understanding that it may be you who has a subconscious attachment to the attachment, and we have to release that before we can release the entity. So really great comment, and I hope that all made sense to everybody. All right, where are we on time? Okay. Scrolling down here. So Brittany Sturgill is saying, and Brittany, you're the one that was told you have 40 attachments. You say, wow, I have a driving phobia along with a long spiritual history. Can't wait to check out your channel. Cool. And come back on a Friday. If you've got questions or whatever, please feel free to pose them. Hopefully you can start to clear these out. And by the way, Brittany and everybody else. There's also a 2-part video series on my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis. If you haven't subscribed, please do. If you click the bell notification icon in addition to subscribing, it'll give you updates every time I publish something new, whether it's a live or it's a piece of content in the normal part of the channel. 2-part video series on clearing spiritual attachments. And a lot of people have written to me, and it's been up for a couple of years now. It's due to be remade. But a lot of people have written to me over the last couple of years saying they were able to successfully move these entities out just by doing this 2-part video series. So that might be a resource that you can check out as well. Okay. Yeah, great point. Paula's saying, and I'm going to give a round of applause for this one, or at least a triangle. I think nightmares are your negative beliefs coming up to be cleared. I think that's exactly right. When you think about, I mean, it's not a pretty thing to think about, but when people vomit, it's really painful. It's kind of gross. Like everything just seems bad about it, but it's your body disgorging something that it believes is toxic or poisonous. Maybe it even saves our lives sometimes, or it certainly prevents us from being sick longer. And usually when you've done that, you actually feel better. I mean, it's nobody wants to have that experience, but it's almost analogous in some ways to maybe how the brain is removing that negative material. And you just said it so well, Paula. I think nightmares are your negative beliefs coming up to be cleared. Coming up almost like, as I said, vomiting out some food that is poisonous or something, or toxic, or went bad or whatever. Your body has this natural defense mechanism to expel all of that. And I think that's exactly what Paul is saying, is that your brain actually has this mechanism to expel that too. Now, in my experience, it can also be that you've got some negative entities in there and they are producing these constant nightmares. I've worked with people who have nightmares every single night of the week, or they have nightmares 4 or 5 nights out of the week. And after we work with, through this, because it could also be past life memories. After we get to the root of that problem and clear it, they generally speaking don't have nightmares anymore. So there are different reasons why you could be having nightmares, but I think, Paula, you're absolutely right that that's one of the classic things that could be happening. Here's English Rose. Hello, English Rose. My dad used to hang in graveyards and drink there when I was a child, and he would get violent with his wife afterwards. I haven't seen him for over 9 years. He's in a dark place. I bet he has them. I bet he does too. I would be stunned if he did not. So, really, really astute observation there. But yeah, I mean, he's combining, a couple of things there that I've learned over the years create extreme vulnerability to these entities. And drinking in a graveyard, yeah, not good. Not good at all. All right. Here's Swarna, 82, saying, I'm interested in doing an ayahuasca retreat, but read that a psychic, someone who sees auras, etc., could see entities attached to marijuana and ayahuasca users. Do you have any advice for me regarding ayahuasca? So I've never done ayahuasca. I think plant medicine is a wonderful thing, but I personally don't have much experience or any experience with using it myself. I think if you were, this is just my opinion now, if you work with somebody who really knows what they're doing, and they've been doing it for a while, and they take you through a process of protecting yourself before you use the plant medicine, then and maybe they're there in attendance, it's probably really safe. It's probably a really great thing for some people to do. Again, don't take my advice. Don't construe this as me telling you to go do it. I'm just giving you my opinion as someone who has never used that. But I don't think that these substances were designed for recreational use. And I think that's probably one of the beauties of ayahuasca, is that when people use ayahuasca, they get sick. It isn't something that people are going to be like, hey, it's Friday night, let's do some ayahuasca. So it has a decided plant medicine aspect to it. But I think if it were me, I would want to protect myself before I engaged in anything that's going to alter my mind. And that would be, for me, it would be calling in my spirit guide It would be calling in ascended masters with whom I feel like I have a relationship. It would be calling in angels, surrounding myself with these loving, powerful beings. And then having as my intention that I want to expand my awareness. I want to heal something about my past. You know, through the years, I got to the point where when I work with people one-on-one and we do a past life regression, for example, I want that person to start in a place in their mind that is gorgeous, is beautiful, where they feel exalted, like a beach or the mountains or the forest, whatever's powerful to them. I want them to be in the presence of their spirit guide. I want them to ask the guide, do I have your permission, guide, to go into this past life? Because I think it's a way of kind of creating that protection, if you will. So, you know, again, kind of long answer, but that is my answer. I believe that these are very powerful tools, and I think, you know, God created these substances for us to use them. But I think that, like anything else, you want to use it responsibly, like fire. Like fire is an amazing tool, but you don't want to just kind of, oh, let's see what happens if you build a fire inside your house in the corner of your living room, you know, where there's no fireplace. Like, that's not a responsible use of it. I think, you know, other kinds of tools are devastating if they're used in the wrong way, but they're very potent and useful if they're used in the correct way. So I guess it's responsible use is my short answer to top off my long answer. All right, so we're getting right near the end. I just wanted to make a pitch for next week. And keep in mind that roughly like every 4 weeks, I do an open roundtable. We do an open roundtable. So if I know there's more questions on this topic, so maybe we do a second live. Let me know if you'd like to do that on this topic, and or when there's an open, you can certainly ask questions maybe that weren't answered today on this topic. But I'm kind of sensing that maybe we should do a second. And if you think so too, just let me know in the comments section or send me an email or what have you. And next week, we're going to be doing, where do we have that? It's over here. We're going to be doing a live on spiritual contracts and relationships. So especially, I think, in the last year, with all the stresses and strains of the lockdowns and everything else that's been going on, there's been a lot of stress on relationships. Not that there wasn't a lot of stress on them before, it's just amped up. And I want to do the live on talking about relationships, focusing primarily on significant other relationships, but it can extend out to you know, friends maybe with whom you've had a falling out. It can extend to children. It can extend to other family members, and just talk about this primarily from a spiritual perspective of why we're in relationships, and talk about spiritual contracts. So, for example, when people get married, they form two contracts in a traditional marriage. They form a legal contract recognized by the state, but they also form a spiritual contract. And when they get divorced, they, generally speaking, just dissolve one of those contracts. They dissolve the legal contract, but they leave the spiritual contract in force. And we'll talk about all that stuff. So I guess let's take one more question, and then we'll bid each other adieu for hopefully a wonderful weekend for you guys. And I hope you'll consider, if you haven't already, subscribing to my channel and tuning in next week for our discussion about spiritual contracts and relationships. And let me know again if you'd like to have another live on the spiritual entities and attachments, because again, I'm sensing that there's enough interest here that we could warrant another one in the next couple of weeks. All right. There was Janice Winslow. Scrolling down here. People are talking about calling on Archangel Michael to put a bubble of protection around you and your loved ones. Red Rover is saying that. I think that's a great idea if you feel like you have a connection with the angel Michael. Let's see. Let's see. Just trying to see if there's another question I can answer real quick. Sorry, folks. Just trying to. Here is Joanna is saying, what is your opinion about seeing the future in the dreams? I think, I don't have personal experience with that kind of clairvoyance about what's going to happen in the future. So I can only answer based upon what clients say to me, what I read, and then just kind of my philosophy about this. So please take everything I say with a major grain of salt. So the first thing I would say is I would go back to free will. And I would say, in my opinion, that everything is always changing in real time. It's dynamically changing constantly. And that something that you saw in the future might be absolutely true in that precise moment. But that humanity, through the free will of literally billions of people, can continue to make different decisions, different choices, and could potentially alter what actually happens through this, again, through this process of free will. So I'm not discounting what people see in the future. I just think it's possible that humanity, through our collective unconscious and our free will, can potentially change what somebody sees as kind of like a snapshot at a particular moment in time. So I really do think that some people have that sensitivity to be able to see the future. I just think that future thing that they see could change. It could change in the kind of intensity of it. It could change in terms of when it happens, how it happens, or maybe even if it happens at all. So hopefully that answers your question. Love the questions today. Love that you guys turned up for this live. Hope to see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next Friday, live at 5 Eastern United States time. Okay, take care. Goodbye.